Hello, this is Kevin Jones coming to you from Kerwin's Game Store in Catskill, New York. I'm back with another episode of Constructed Accumulated Knowledge today. And today we're still going to be doing Modern, but we're going to be doing Blue-Black Fairies. This is a deck that I played a lot in the past, and I figured I'd give it a new try as Modern's undergone some changes recently, and I'm excited to see what fairies can bring to the table. So, if you stay tuned, we'll get right into it. Thank you. Hello, Kevin Jones here. Welcome to part 1 of Constructed Accumulated Knowledge for Blue-Black Fairies in Modern. So today we're going to talk about Blue-Black Fairies, which is a deck that doesn't see a ton of play in Modern. It's definitely not one of the main, slam dunk tier 1 strategies in the format right now. But I do think it's both underrated and well positioned, especially considering the changes that Modern's undergone recently. The rise of Death's Shadow, the ban of Gitaxian Probe, the advent of Fatal Push, all these things I think generally fare well for fairies because it occupies this Grixis Delver-ish kind of play pattern niche where it's like a mid-rangey blue deck that can be a little bit aggressive sometimes or can be a little bit controlling sometimes. So there's other decks that have done this in the past. There's Grixis, and then there was some Jeskai decks that did a similar thing too. And this deck basically, fills that spot in the metagame, but is able to do so with more resilient threats. With Bitter Blossoms, Man Lands, some Liliana of the Veil, and then some legitimately powerful counter magic and disruption in the clicks, the Mistbinds and Vendilion clicks, and the Cryptic commands, as well as Spellstutter Sprite, which is a super good counterspell against Death's Shadow, and a super good counterspell when you have active Bitter Blossom that helps you close the door when you're ahead. Super important that you can win the games that you're supposed to win with a deck like this, because a few things can, be pretty good against it. So the matchups where your cards are live, it's important to make sure that you can get those when you have when Spellstutter Sprite is countering things and Mistbind Click is tapping them out and stuff. You really want to make sure that those matchups are squared away. Because there are going to be tough times when you see Cavern of Souls or Dredge or something where you're going to struggle. And in those matchups, you've got some other stuff in the sideboard and in the main deck that you can use to the best of your abilities. But anyway, just as a general rule, we'll go over a few things about this deck. I like it initially because this was the first deck I ever did well with. I played a lot of PDQs back in my day when they were one-day events, winner take all. None of this PDQ nonsense. So back then there were the Northeast. We had some pretty tough PDQs, but I played Blue-Black Fairies in all the extended PDQs one year. I believe it was 2011. Yeah, it was 2011. Fall 2010 to winter 2011, and I played Blue-Black Fairies in probably 6 or 7 PDQs, and I got smacked around the first couple times till I finally learned the deck. And once I learned the deck, I managed to get second place in a PDQ, losing to Elves, which is a weird deck that no one really played. Then I got top 8 the very next weekend, and I lost to this random Bant deck in Old Extended. And the weekend after that, I got second place again, losing to Esper Callblade type deck. So while I was not able to actually make the Pro Tour with this deck, this was my first taste of constructed success or real success in Magic. And I mean, we all have our own metric for success, but back then I thought that a PDQ top 8 was pretty good, and I still do think that that's an impressive accomplishment in a lot of ways. So yeah, that's part of why I like this deck. It's got a lot of sentimental value to me. After all my near misses, I ended up playing the standard PDQ season, and I played Splinter Twin right after it came out, and I won the first PDQ of that season. So that was great. So this deck got me, all ready and all familiar with success. So then I finally was able to play on a Pro Tour later in that year. But anyway, so besides it's having a lot of, intangible sentimental value, I do think that the deck is pretty underrated and pretty good right now. I really like the interaction that Spellstutter Sprite has when everyone's trying to Death Shadow you. I really like the interaction that Bitter Blossom has when everyone's trying to Fatal Push you. I like Vendilion Click as a catch-all against some control decks and some of the more unfair decks. as a lot of these decks, while extremely powerful, do have a very strong disparity in the type of cards that they play. So a deck like Bant Eldrazi, if you make them cycle their Drowner of Hope, they might just draw a useless Noble Hierarch or a Sky Spawner or something that's much easier to manage. And something Vendilion Clique is very good in those matchups. It's also really good against a deck like Red-Green Valakut, where their Titans and Scapeshifts are the only cards that you really care about, and you can beat pretty much everything else. Another example is Ad Nauseam, where they literally need to resolve Ad Nauseam to win. You get rid of that Ad Nauseam, combined with your discard and your counter spells, you should be able to pressure them enough to close the game out. So I really like Vendilion Clique. It's not so great when there's a ton of Lightning Bolts everywhere. But in this metagame, where I think Lightning Bolt has gotten worse because Death Shadow generally doesn't die to it, and Fatal Push has gotten much better, people are incentivized to play Fatal Push over Lightning Bolt most matchups. So I think that makes something like Vendilion Clique, which doesn't always get Fatal Push, but often still will, still fine though, because it provides a lot of value for you also with discard spells in your deck, where you can cycle away the old, discard spells on turn 5 or 6 when nobody really has a hand anymore. Hopefully draw, a piece of counter magic that can beat the top of their deck, or removal spell that you need, or another fairy to help you close the game out. And the card's really good for that as well. It's super important to have cards that help you beat the really interesting, weird stuff that Modern throws at you. Because, when you have, Inquisition, Snapcasters, Fatal Pushes, Go for the Throats, Liliana, Dismember, you can beat the creature decks pretty well. You at least have a suite equipped to beat the creature decks. But then when you get something like we said, like Ad Nauseam or Dredge thrown at you, it's nice to have something that is a little bit different than the rest of your deck. And Clique provides that, also giving you perfect information to line up your Mistbind Cliques and your somewhat situational counter magic, as you know that the coast is clear to Mistbind Clique on their upkeep and get maximum value, as well as allowing you to know what to Mana Leak versus what to Spell Stutter, and then what to use your Snapcaster for, or you don't cast a Thoughtseize when it can't get anything, or when you could have cast an Inquisition, and so on and so forth. So it just does a lot here, and it's also important at clocking and killing your opponent, because it has 3 power and flash, so you can throw the Clique into play when you have the time to do so, and then leave up your mana to answer their threats and just plug away at them. So yeah, so it's cool to be able to play multiple Vendilion Cliques, because most decks I've played, like the Grixis decks, usually just play 1, maybe 2. But this deck plays a full 3, which I really like. And it also plays 3 copies of another 3-drop. We just said the phrase 3 a lot. That's okay, though. We're rolling. We got 3 copies of Liliana of the Veil, a card that I haven't really played a ton with in Modern. I played a lot of Shardless Bug in Legacy, so I played this card in Legacy, and I understood how good it really could be when you had an attrition-y value plan and a lot of 2-for-1s in your deck. But here we don't have a ton of 2-for-1s. Bitter Blossom, Snapcaster are kind of 2-for-1s. Cryptic is pretty much a 2-for-1. But aside from that, you don't have many cards that go up. You have some Ancestrals in your sideboard. We'll get to the sideboard in a little bit, but the Ancestrals are obviously pretty good with Lilianas a lot of the time. But here, this allows you to, answer some things that would generally be tough for you. A Thought-Knot Seer that snuck under your defenses, or a Reality Smasher, something like a really big Death Shadow when you don't have a Fatal Push, or, a big Tarmogoyf. A lot of stuff like that. Tassiger, Gurmag Angler, these cards are kind of tough to beat. You have 2 Go for the Throats, so those are the only things that beat them, and those decks have Spell Snare a lot, so it's nice to have the Liliana for that. The Dismember is also added insurance against something like Tassiger, Gurmag Angler, Hooting Mandrills if people go that deep. Kills Tarmogoyfs, kills some Death Shadows. But, yeah, I really like Liliana here. It does something very different than the rest of the deck, as it pressures combo decks and, some of the more linear decks. It can ultimate, give Tron some trouble, stop them from having multiple threats, so that, you might be able to get through between your Lilianas, a removal spell, a counter spell, a Cryptic here or there, Vendilion Clique, all that stuff together. You might be able to just disrupt Tron enough to stop them from Ulamogging you and, shutting the door, making it impossible for you to win. So it's nice that you can, have some diversity in your threat package. And that's why I like Liliana here. I initially thought I would want Ancestral Vision main deck, But this list, by the way, that we're running today was played to top 4 of the SCG Classic in Worcester a couple weeks ago at the Legacy Open. It was piloted by Brandon Dempsey, and I was there cheering Brandon on because I got to root for the Fairies guy. This was my jam back in the day, so I made sure to root him on. I gave him one of those fancy split card tokens of Kevin Jones and the Daddy that you can get from Inkland Customs. I had one of those, and I handed it to Brandon, and I said, "Make this your Bitter Blossom token. Win this tournament, please." He said, "I'm going to try," and then he did not win the tournament. Disappointing, but the deck still did great, and every time I watched him play, I said, "Wow, he's got all these weird cards in his Fairies deck. I don't know what's going on here." You know, all these like 6 discard spells is pretty standard, but he's got all these Lilianas and no Ancestral Visions, and a bunch of lands and Snapcaster Mages and all sorts of three-hole Vendilion Clicks. And I was like, "What's going on?" But he just kept winning and winning and winning. And I noticed that the deck plays very well with few cards in hand, as you know, you have a couple 2-for-1s like Cryptic, and when Liliana's like hampering your opponent's resources, they kind of have to play into your counter spells, as you only have 1 to 2 cards in hand when Liliana's going on typically, so it incentivizes them to like play their stuff out because they're going to lose it, which walks right into Spell Stutters and Cryptics, and then when you get all their answers gone, you can misbind safely and close the game with your man lands. As Liliana, everyone down to nothing, attack with Creeping Tar Pit a few times is a pretty realistic way for this deck to win. So, that all said, I'm excited to try out the Lilianas, and I really like these clicks as well. I've been playing this in paper a little bit, but I had a little bit of a different list. I'm gonna move my Ancestrals to the sideboard and try to get some Lilianas and try to play a more Brandon-esque list the next time I play Paper Modern. But all that said, that's pretty much it for the main deck. We went over all of them. The 4 Fatal Push is pretty standard. 4 Inquisition is great. Helps you out with burn, as you can get a little bit behind again a deck like that. You don't have any Brutality's main deck, so could be some trouble for you, as Bitter Blossom, losing you a bunch of life is not always the best against burn. But all that said, Mana Leaks, 2 Mana Leaks is nice as a catch-all. 2 Snapcasters. This deck doesn't have the Thought Scours, Lightning Bolt, Serum Vision package that the Grixis decks have. It doesn't have the Paths and Helixes that the Jeskai decks have. So, like, Snapcaster is not a slam dunk 4 of in this blue deck, because, like, your fairy creatures are often better and work more with your plan. So, like, that's why you're going on 2 Snapcasters. Excuse me. Can't talk without a voice, but Daddy's still here. But yeah, that's why we're working on 2 Snapcasters. They're great to flashback discard spells against some of the other fair blue decks. Like a deck like Jund, while they still have cards in the hand, it's good to flash those back. And then it's obviously great to flash back Mana Leak, Fatal Push, and then at the end, your chains being Cryptic, tap your creatures, draw a card, attack. Tap your creatures, draw a card, attack. Snapcaster, tap your creatures, bounce Snapcaster, then Snapcaster, tap your creatures, blah, 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 blah. Those patterns happen a lot, and they just present some inevitability. That way, like, even if you can't deal with literally everything, you might be able to just kill them independent of what they're doing, because you have so many Cryptics. This is part of why, like, the flying creatures are really good, because a lot of times you're just fogging the ground, attacking for 5 in the air, and then, fogging the ground, attacking for 5 in the air, and, like, you do that a lot. You run out of answers to, every single threat your opponent plays, so sometimes you're chump blocking with Bitter Blossom and racing back with a click of some sort, or with a man land. Like, there's a lot of different patterns, and this deck is kind of scrappy. It picks up games. Sometimes it just goes like discard spell, attack you with my man lands 4 times. Creature lands, whatever you want to call it. But, yeah, so we're going to see in this series, we're really going to see how the deck does, and all the different interesting play patterns it has to win games. So, yeah, so that, like I said, that does it for the spell suite. Let's look at the lands real quick. Got to scroll down here so we can see all of them. We got 3 Tar Pits, the top 24 lands. This deck plays a higher land count than a lot of other decks, but that's because it really likes to play with untapped mana, really likes to hit all its land drops, and also it has 7 creature lands. You win the games a lot with all your creature lands, and you even trade them off occasionally, so it's nice to be able to keep hitting your land drops throughout the game and always have Mistbind, Click, Cryptic, some of your more expensive spells. So I never hated lands in this deck, and PV, Paulo Vitor, as many know him, played fairies a lot and even recorded a modern video with it recently, and I think he had 25 lands. So even 24 is not gospel for sure with this deck, and a lot of people like to play even more because the deck plays well, like I said, plays well with a lot of lands in play. We got 3 copies of Darkslick Shores. Pretty good land here because it lets you Thoughtseize on turn 1 and then have counter magic up on turn 2. You know, it's important to be able to have black mana on turn 1 and turn 2 and then triple blue on turn 4. So, and double blue on turn 3. So that's a reason why there's so many dual lands in here. As we'll go down, we'll see one of Drowned Catacomb, which I'm not sold on. 3 basic islands, which I love. 4 Mutavault, important to have creature lands again, and 1 that can help boost your Spellstutter sprites is the best creature land you can play here. We got 4 Polluted Deltas, standard fetch land with 2 Watery Graves, a swamp, and 3 islands, so 6 targets for the Deltas. Pretty perfect. We got 3 Secluded Glens, the fairy land here. You need to reveal a fairy, of which you have 4, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 creatures, or 13 cards with the subtype fairy in your main deck. So the Secluded Glens will often be live, and when they're not, you know, you can just get them into play on turn 1 or what have you. Discard spell on turn 1, tap land plus discard or Fatal Push on turn 2. A lot of ways to get your lands into play. This deck has enough cheap spells that it can use its mana when it can. So, again, that's pretty solid there. Again, the 2 Watery Graves, nice to have some shock lands for your Deltas so that you can make sure you have double black into triple blue, which pretty strict requirement, but this deck can do it. It's only 2 colors, you know, nothing too crazy. I thought about, you know, trimming a Glen or even 2 lands for like a couple Ghost Quarters or Tectonic Edges because you do have some trouble with the big mana decks. I think if I could pick one, I'd play Ghost Quarter. And I was doing that with my paper deck for a while, but I was having trouble with my mana. So I don't think I love doing that. I think 4 colorless lands is about the limit, especially when you have Lilianas here. If you didn't have Lilianas, you could be a little more aggressive with your colorless lands. I'm going to stick it how it is with the Secluded Glens for now. You got 2 Go for the Throats, which we mentioned briefly. Pretty good at killing basically anything but affinity creatures, which is nice to have a catch-all when your Fatal Pushes aren't on. Reality Smasher, etc., etc. Those things are a Tassiger. Those things are sometimes troublesome for you, so having 3 answers to them is good, outside of the Lilianas and counterspells. And here we'll move over to the sideboard, and then just drag the screen a little bit so I can have more sideboard over here. So, last minute I threw a couple cards in. Apparently the list that I sent over only had 12 cards in it. For whatever reason, maybe there was a mistake on the SCG site when it got copied over. But I think Brandon had Kalidas's, so I added those. I really liked the way they played when I watched him play. They're pretty good with Liliana, too. You get a token right away. Kalidas Damnation is an awesome strategy against something like Dredge or Abzan Company, where you might not be able to get rid of everything. It's just nice. A 4-mana big life-linking creature is pretty good when most of your cards are small, utility, tricky flyers or snapcasters. So like Kalidas, again, a little different than the rest of your threat-based, but I like it for that reason. We got some Ancestral Visions. Probably should be a 3rd. I think over here on the Kerwin's account, we only have 2 at the moment, which is a shame. But then again, the card is really, really hit or miss. And if it's not good, it's pretty terrible. So I can see only justifying playing 2. I threw in a Glenalandra Archmage last minute. I wasn't too sure how good it was going to be, but it seems kind of nice against control decks and some of the slower combo decks. It was a really good card back in the day. A lot of things have changed since then, but like if something like Scapeshift stays popular, like this is a card I really, really like having. Also good against Blue-White Control, Grixis Control, anything like that. Some more 2-Elves. We got the Damnations, like I said. Good catch-all against anything from, you know, Bank Company to Abzan to Dredge, Boggles, Affinity, any random thing like that, you might want the Damnations. So those are pretty good. Got 2 collective brutalities for life gain. Really good when you board in the Ancestral Visions at like discarding excess cards, like making sure your vision resolves. Any additional discard is great in matchups like other control decks or against, you know, some of the unfair decks. So I really like the brutalities too. Also very good against burn or anything remotely aggressive. Grixis Delver, I would probably bring them in as well. These negates, it's nice to have 2 negates. Pretty solid against Tron, which I imagine could be kind of tough. I could see playing some actual land hate in the sideboard, or even, you know, the Ghost Quarters in the main, and then boarding in Surgicals when you hit them, when you Ghost Quarter them, so that you can keep them off Tron permanently. But hopefully you don't see a ton of Tron. Tron is like around a lot. It's probably not the best matchup, but I feel like every deck I register for a Modern tournament is bad against Tron. Can't play Splinter Twin anymore, sadly enough. So besides that, most of my decks get ranched by Tron, and I just kind of have to deal with that. So yeah, we got 2 Damnations, 2 Negates, 2 Kalitas, 2 Collective Brutality, 2 Surgical Extraction, 2 Ancestral Vision. That is 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. And then the one-ofs are a Dispel, great for the other blue decks and burn. The Archmage, which I said, slower combo decks, and, you know, grindy mid-range and control decks. Pretty solid there. Also, I'd bring in the Archmage against something like Skred with all its Planeswalkers, or, you know, Red-White Prison or something like that. And then our last card in the sideboard is an Engineered Explosives, which is one of the best sideboard cards in Modern for sure. And almost every multicolored, you know, mid-range deck should play at least 1 copy in their 75, if not more. Engineered Explosives is a great card. Beats up on Lantern, beats up on Affinity, Boggles. Occasionally can get a Jund deck, you know, or Death Shadow, get a couple Death Shadows, a couple Tarmogoyfs. And anything with a lot of 2-drops like Tarmogoyf, Scavenging Ooze, Dark Confidence, something like that, you really like Explosives there too. Takes a little bit of pressure off your removal spells. Lets you save a counterspell for a Haymaker maybe, as opposed to a creature. But yeah, so that's basically it for the deck overview. I'm going to quickly talk about some matchups. A little more than we already did. I think we basically talked about what each sideboard card is for and when I would bring it in. But let's talk about like what cards come out real quick before we end up closing this part down. But yeah, so like when you play against any Cavern of Souls deck, you're obviously going to want to cut these Mana Leaks. You can be trimming Inquisitions against like Eldrazi Tron, ban Eldrazi, as these aren't as good. Same with the Mana Leaks. They get much worse when people are trying to cheat, you know, 4, 5, and 6 drops into play early. You know, getting 3 drops doesn't matter so much. You can keep them and try to get like scryings or maps. That's like a reasonable thing that I've seen done sometimes. But like you really just want to be Thoughtseizing. Thoughtseize is great against these decks, as they have a lot of air, you know, between maps, scrying, Mind Stone, a lot of weird mopey things in their decks. So like if they don't have the good stuff, you know, that sometimes you can just take their one thing that matters and get them dead. But if you see a lot of slow decks in your metagame, I could see you splitting the Inquisition and Thoughtseize 3/3. But I would just be boarding down on them. And Mana Leaks. Well, if there's no... I might just keep Mana Leaks against Tron, because even though some of the Eldrazi Tron decks have Cavern, it's just... The matchup is just pretty bad, and you need to make sure you have anything that can stop them. But I would definitely be trimming Fatal Push and Inquisition in those matchups. When else would I board out Fatal Push? I would keep a couple in against Blue-White Control or anything with Celestial Colonnade. I'd keep a couple in against Grixis just to deal with Tar Pit. Maybe I would just leave in the Dismember and the Go for the Throat, because they also kill Tasigur, but I like not being able to get Spell Snared, and the Go for the Throat often does. So I kind of like keeping a couple pushes in post-board in those matchups. Bitter Blossom doesn't really come out that often. Maybe against Burn, you'd trim on them. But you would hit Thoughtseize first for sure, and then you'd hit like Dismember, Go for the Throat, a Cryptic, a V-Click. You get rid of those things before you get rid of the Bitter Blossoms, because even an early Bitter Blossom backed up by some Spell Stutters and Counterspells is really good against Burn, as long as you're on the play and you deal with their early creature. It can be one of the quickest ways to beat them before they top deck, you know, 3 points of damage over and over. You also have Brutality to like buoy out your Bitter Blossom in some of the more aggressive matchups, and that's like a nice thing there. But yeah, so against a deck like Burn, I probably trim like a couple Bitter Blossoms, a couple Thought Seizes, board in Dispel, Brutality, Negate, Kalitas, because it's nice to have a huge lifelinker that they can't really kill. And yeah, that would be that. Against Eldrazi Tron, I would board out Inquisitions and 2 pushes. Board in Negate, Kalitas, maybe Ancestral. Probably not. Maybe Damnation if they have a bunch of creatures. Probably not, though. We'll just keep it to like 4 or 5 cards there. And then against Death Shadow, I would trim on... Cryptic's a little slow, but so is Mistbind. Although they don't know how the best answers to Mistbind. I'd probably trim Mana Leaks against this deck, as your other counterspells and Spell Stutter are much better. I'd like all the discard spells still. I like the removal. Death Shadow, I see like Ancestral being pretty good if the games grind down. Explosives being pretty good, so I'd bring in like those 3 cards. And then I might bring in a Negate or 2. And I'd board out like 2 Mana Leaks. And maybe the Dismember. Maybe a Click. They're probably trimming removal against you because it's not really reliable. They'll keep their Terminates if they have Terminates, but they won't be... probably won't be pushing you post-board very often. So you might be able to get away with your Mistbinds and Vendilions living, as they don't have much answers to them. But yeah, so that's probably how I would board against Death Shadow. A couple other matchups real quick. If you expect something like Affinity I think is a really good matchup if you can get Bitter Blossom down early. Being on the play is important. Against Affinity, I would board in Damnation, Engineered Explosives. And I might board in the Negates if I'm really worried about plating. But I'm much more worried about Etched Champion, so I'd probably just keep in the Mana Leaks. And I would board out a Click and the Lilianas. So Liliana's terrible against Affinity, obviously, so I'd go like -4, 1 Click, 3 Lilianas. Definitely 3 Lilianas off the bat into Damnations and an Explosives. So that's 3 for 3, and then I might bring in the Brutalities or the Negates, but I don't think I would. I kind of like keeping the Clicks and just doing those 3 because Click's a good blocker against Signal Pest. It's a good blocker against their Flyers. It's nice to have an answer and a blocker on 4 mana. You can like push, you can block, and then if they try to go in on the Ravager or something like that, you can push in response or whatever. Those are all reasonable strategies. But all right, so let's do like Bant Eldrazi, and then we'll do like a control deck, and then we'll wrap this up. So yeah, so Bant Eldrazi, which I seem to see a lot of whenever I play Modern, but I guess other people don't see as much. But I just maintain that the deck is everywhere, especially when I go to bigger tournaments. I see it everywhere at SCG Classics and stuff like that. But I would go with cutting the Mana Leaks, and then cutting the Inquisitions, adding Damnation, Kalitas, maybe Explosives, maybe Negate. They have Elspeth. They have weird stuff like that sometimes. That's how I'd probably board against Bant Eldrazi. And then control deck like Blue-White or Grixis. Board pretty similarly because they both have creature lands in Tar Pit or Colonnade. I would keep in 2 pushes. I would take out Go for the Throat probably. Take out Dismember. I might trim on a Cryptic because I would be expecting Dispels. But all the counter spells are pretty good against those decks, especially Blue-White when they're trying to jam in Planeswalkers. But I would like to board in Dispel, Negate, Archmage, maybe Brutality. Those 6 cards for 1, 2, 3. 2 Go for the Throats, a Dismember. Maybe 1 discard spell because they're bad top decks and 2 pushes. So that's 6 cards. Yeah, for 6 cards, I like that. You can bring in the brutalities there because they're a discard spell that gives you some reach. So I like that. So yeah, there's like a handful of matchups that you could play. It's a pretty comprehensive overview of the deck. I hope everyone was able to enjoy this and, you know, stay attentive for as long as it was. In the next part, we'll definitely be jumping right into a league. We're getting some matches played, and we'll be able to see what the deck can really do in this modern format, which I still think is pretty wide open. And definitely people love it. I'm seeing a lot of Modern being played, and not a lot of complaining about Modern, which I can't say for the other formats. So yeah. So next week, or next time, expect some Modern Magic. And I'm Kevin Jones from Kerwin's Game Store, and I'll see you guys soon for part 2. Thank you. Bye. Hello, this is Kevin Jones. Welcome back to Kerwin's Game Store. Thank you for tuning in to part 1 of Constructed Accumulated Knowledge with Modern Faeries. Next up is going to be part 2, where we're going to get right into the gameplay, and you'll be able to catch that right here on Kerwin's Game Store soon. So thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you guys soon.